your area of activity so that our viewers in the internet have a better understanding about where do you come from. And we are broadcasted to many channels, many websites, not only in Poland but on the many websites in Europe, and that's where there were trials as well. There were broadcasted some panels as well to the United States. So I am not sure if that one is broadcasted to United States, but we have many panels where many people from the United States are as well as speakers in some panels related to the economy or high technology. We gather speakers from, for instance, MIT, from United States, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, right? And many others. We have as well many speakers, great speakers from Kenya, India, and all over the Europe. So this is my pleasure again to have a very great two foreign speakers. So let's be some kind of Pablo, just first, say some few things about yourself, please.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. I am Pablo de la Fuente. I'm Spanish and I live in Poland. I'm a historian and I teach in the John Paul II Catholic University on the chair of Hispanic world politics and international relationships. And well, thank you very much for your kind invitation, Mr. Krysiak.
Thanks a lot, Pablo. And David, please.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to the conference and this panel. I'm an American. I was born in the United States, but I've lived in Europe, particularly Slovakia, since 1997, when I arrived in Slovakia. I've been teaching continuously at the Comenius University in Bratislava. And in particular, I teach the European Union course. I teach the first course in European Union. Actually, it's called European Integration course. And I often get questions from students who ask me, well, why you, an American, are teaching us about European integration, which is a good question, yeah, on the surface. But of course, when you think of our intellectual history, very often it takes an outsider to see what's happening inside. If you're an insider, sometimes you can't quite see it as clearly. For example, in America, we had de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville came to America and he told Americans how we practice democracy, and I think that work has never been surpassed in some way. Also, I often answer students, well, the Americans did it first. We had 13 colonies. These colonies became independent states. People forget about that, but there was a period where we were independent states, and we had to go through an integration process, the very first in the world of independent states integrating together. So these are, again, this is why what I try to explain to students. So once again, I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, David. And I see, already from very beginning, it seems to be very exciting, especially as you said, your point of view as an outsider. So I think the excitement of our viewers is rising now. So let me just on the very beginning, to just introduce with some statements to our panel, and I am going to show on a screen some slides of my presentation. I think you see that now, right? Yes.
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 Yeah. So. Look, just let's start the return to Schuman's Europe. That's what is basically the mission of the, excuse me, this is a mission of Institute of Schumann Thought, And we got many initiatives, many projects, related to that basically mission and that activity. And we treat Robert Schuman as our master, and we try to follow him. I am speaking about the Institute of Schumann's Thought, but as well many people who are just, in that circle, who are just working within together with the Institute of Schumann Thought and creating a different Schumann's group. So one of our initiatives and the projects which we initiated very last weeks, this is Pan-European Schumann Group. This is a website you see, and on that website you can find, all things which are, speaking about that project. And the main goal of that is just to integrate all people around the Europe who are just who identify themselves with Schumann's idea and a concept and the model of the Schumann's Europe. So the website is www.schumannsgroup.org. So what we do, we just would like to outweight, to create a certain balance to the Spinelli group. So the Spinelli group was created a few years ago, and their goal is to create a superstate out of that Europe. So this was against the concept of Robert Schuman, and the superstate is basically, taking back, the certain country identity, national identity, patriotism. So just, the superstate is something like uniform, which is going to some certain extent cancel identity of the particular nations. And we don't like that, and we don't agree. And there are many people in Europe which who don't agree with that. So the Pan-European Schumann's Group is basically take this mission to act, towards the shaping Europe according and the European Union according to the Schumann's idea. To reiterate that and change the name, which name appropriate to the Schuman idea is Community of European Nations. So everybody is invited to sign in, in that group, to be in that team. You can go in and sign, and you can read the constitution we put. The constitution is just basically certain mainframe which was drawn by Robert Schuman. So there are as well many other projects and activities which is undertaken by Institute of Schumann Thought. And this all activities are basically coming from the idea to implement Robert Schumann's idea to create between the people a relationship as a main goal, as a goal which should be before we do any focus on institutions or economy. So Schuman itself said, yes, first of all, relationship. So the spirit, he said, the Europe should be the community of a spirit based on the Christian values. And, just take a look. This is the Father Professor Bernard Ardura. Now is a beatification process, which is going to approach very soon to an end. And there is a prayer for the intercession of God's servant Robert Schuman, who basically is now we can ask him for intercession. And as you see, this is a very, quite interesting statement of that prayer, which says, Lord God, following the example of man, full of peace, gentle, quiet, and with humble heart, I am turning to you in my prayer. Through intercession of Robert Schuman, I entrust myself to your divine providence, and I confess to you, you are my master and teacher, and I have confidence in you. Hear my prayer and come to show the holiness of your servant Robert Schuman, the disciple of Christ in politics. Lord God, let me do your will today whenever I am and I live. Amen. And this in that prayer I would like to highlight the statement which was put in that prayer. The Robert Schuman, as a servant, Robert Schuman is, basically described as a disciple of Christ in politics. Disciple of Christ in politics, which is a very, interesting, view of that what we nowadays need in many areas, disciples of Christ in politics. It's very interesting because sometimes many people, basically try to stay far away from the politics, and just many people think, yes, this is a black area. I don't like it. There is not, righteous. There is not right. Very usually, the people who are dealing with the politics are not that which is related to any Christian values. And of course, many politicians, they are not acting according to the truth, according to the, a friendship and many important values. But that was not on the view of Robert Schuman. That was not his point of view. And the next thing I just to highlight, not spending much time on the description of a personality of Robert Schuman, is just that when he was acting, he made a very big steps towards the creating a community of European nations. So Robert Schuman never thought about the European Union. He wasn't in favor of European Union. He had no in his vocabulary the European Union word, right? So his idea ever was just the community of European nations, and this is basically the call and still in a community in then next the European Economic Community, and the next steps of actions toward the different social activities there was related to create a spirit of community everywhere. So, and finally, in 1984, the ideology of Arcello Spinelli comes to the voice, aiming to remove Christian values, which were treated by Spinelli as a barrier for development of European Union. So the Spinelli took, this position against, because getting rid of the Christian values was by purpose, so that to create the European Union. And then 1992 a Treaty of Maastricht, there was the first time when this European Union name appeared, first time, and then Amsterdam Treaty 1997, and finally Lisbon 2007 as a kind of a final step to, as I am saying, demolishing of community of European nations, demolishing, and the Schuman, put many, speeches, had many speeches and put many statements, which are basically, going towards that, concept and the practical implementation. And very important, I think, to highlight is that he is an author he is a kind of an author of conceptualization of the model of community of European nations in the light of the complementary role of spiritual authority and the civil authority. So what he said, yes, the human being is a let's say a unity of spirit and the unity of a body, of a kind of a flesh, right? So this is a unity, and these two, I mean, areas have to be served. He just find out that the spiritual authority, or we can say a church, or and can serve the spiritual needs, and the civil authority can serve or should serve for this, for the body, for the flesh. But this, because of the human being is a unit of these two both things, so the two authorities should, cooperate in these services. We cannot imagine that these two authorities just, compete, or one removes another from that area and try to get a monopoly over that service. So this concept is just, coming back, from taking from many considerations and the certain, values, so different, scientific as well, and the practical developments, which were over 200 years of Christianity in Europe. So his, basically concept, unity, solidarity, and peace, we can read as a certain, basically, we can read as a certain basically logic statement from implication from mathematical point of view. So he's just saying, if there is, we cannot obtain solidarity without unity, and the peace cannot happen. So if the previous component is negative, false, so the next one cannot be true. So solidarity is a certain, sharing of goods, some physical goods, being solidar in, material things, sharing the commodities, this very, things related to the material activity of the people. So, as we say, can ask today, yes, do we have, solidarity? I don't think so. So it means that we should come back to unity and make more, work on the unity. So if we do not have a solidarity, there is a danger, there's a big danger that we are going to the war. And as one of the speakers from European Parliament said that we have, in fact, the war today. This war in Europe is not the war, military war, but the war, which is some attacking, this.
Yes.
There are some interruptions. I can notice.
Hello.
Hi. I'm not
hello.
able.
We are again, right? That there was some miss. Now we are right back. Okay, thank you. So I'm just moving
in the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, last 30 seconds. Then one of the European members of the parliament said we have the war, in fact, because, they were not military war, but the war where the, big guys, with a bigger capitals are imposing on the small one, attacking, and trying to impose their way, their approach to create the Europe. And so Robert Schuman basically, invented the five, or just highlighted the 5 pillars of the Schuman's Europe, and these 5 pillars are just, freedom, solidarity, diversity, patriotism, and the Christianity. And around that pillars, he was basically developing his certain concrete and practical implementations for the community of European nations. So as I am just trying to come back to to go to the Schumann's main statements, which were, for instance, very important, like that one. He said, my idea is not to merge states to create a superstate. So he was fully against. Our European states are historical reality. From a psychological point of view, it would be impossible to do away with them, So, and he's creating that statement as well. The next one, to our mind, European policy is certainly not in the contradiction with the patriotic ideas. It shouldn't be in contradiction in the patriotic ideas. So we see today, he's referring to the love, patriotism. He is saying love. If you love your own country, you can love the others. If you don't love your country, you are not be able to love the others. So that he was putting these statements, from the perspective, he was warning against, the very dangerous impact of basically Spinelli ideology. He was kind of he put kind of as well prophecies, warning about how the European community can be destroyed if the Spinelli ideology will be implemented. So he's saying about the democracy in Europe will be a Christian or it will be not at all. This is a very, a strong position. And finally, I am just putting here in that table, there is a kind of a comparison between three models and concepts. So community, so according to the Schuman on the left, column, and the characteristics of that system, of that model. You see in the middle column, the superstate. For instance, there is a very interesting, if you consider what Schuman says about the solidarity in community, he says solidarity between nations and within the nations. So superstate says solidarity of supranational elites, pan-European oligarchy. So superstate and the Spinelli were thinking about, about the solidarity and the solidarity between only selected group of, let's say, to simplify that, very rich people. And the nationalist state, look, to distinguish from the community, the solidarity above all in nation. So the solidarity in nationalist state is basically trying to exclude solidarity with the others, which means that if we try to link the solidarity to the love, so if you say that you love your own country and you hate the others, so it means that the first statement that you love your own country is not true. Because love cannot exclude the others. Love some people, is contradictory, would be contradictory to the hate of the others. So therefore, Schuman very clearly, defines and put the characteristic of this concept, of this model, both against the superstate and to some certain extent probably not against, but he's trying to highlight, how is as well very danger for creating the European community if one country try to be just focused on his own interest, and try to dominate. And if we just, try to look, into the basically what is happening in Europe currently. So the domination, German domination, for instance, is just clearly, noticed. And this can be, as we see, in the European Commission, we see that on the managerial positions, the Germans have a majority of the places. So if we see the European Union, the European community, European Union, the Commission at the European, in the Brussels, the European Commission is not democratic body, because it's dominated by not only Germans but the French, and this doesn't allow to shape the democracy, and as well it is contradictory to the basically contradictory to the community. So I would say there is a specific issue and problem which should be fixed in that reshaping of the European Union, coming back to the community of European nations. And the final, I just, here in that picture you see the Professor Stanisław Gebhardt. He's from Poland, and here he was associate of Robert Schuman. He is over 90 years old. He's still alive. He was attending as well. He was a speaker on some panels at the European Schuman Festival, and he basically, he worked together with Schuman, and he delivered us many information about how it looked like. So here you have a picture where on this left side, this is a Professor Gebhardt, a young man, at that time he was something like 20 years old, and Robert Schuman was at that time 70 years old. So big difference in age, but no, excuse me, the Robert Schuman is here. Yeah, the Robert Schuman is here, and this is Professor Gebhardt. So at that time, the Robert Schuman created a kind of a young movement, young people movement in Europe, trying, to create that, society of people following, his ideas. But unfortunately, he passed over in 1963, and he was not able himself to continue. So let's take this mission to come back to his ideas and return to the Schuman Europe and create a community of European nations. So now let me ask, first, David, to present your. We have a much time, so you don't need to be in a hurry, and just we are very interested, what you will say in that context. Thank you. Go ahead. Your floor is yours.
Hey, thank you very much. I'd like to talk first about Robert Schuman, and then a little more structurally about the concept of federalism. Robert Schuman, as we all know, and as you so eloquently presented, was a man who believed very strongly in a Christian Europe, in a new Christendom in Europe, through this organization which he co-founded. And in fact, at the beginning, we know from history that it was so dominated by Catholic thinkers that the British, it is said, were reluctant to join this organization because they saw it as some kind of a Catholic conspiracy at the beginning. So it was very, very apparent at the beginning the role of Christian Democrats in the creation of the early community. Schuman, as we all know, believed that this could be a vehicle for the flourishing of Christendom again in Europe, that this could be a springboard to a revival of Christianity, particularly Catholic Christianity. And that was kind of his vision. And as we all know, he got that vision in part through one of his mentors, the French philosopher Jacques Maritain. And Jacques Maritain had a theory of democracy, which is often called sort of integral humanism or autonomous Christianity. I'm using here some of the ideas of the British scholar Alan Phimister, who has written about this situation. According to Phimister, the problem is that when Schuman was relying so much on Jacques Maritain and his theory of democracy, which relied on this integral humanism or autonomous Christianity, it was based on a fallacy. It was based on what Phimister calls the fallacy of affirming consequence. The idea here is that if A leads to B, then B must logically lead back to A, which is not necessarily true. For example, and here with A, Phimister puts revealed Christianity leading to a political ideal, a liberal democratic system that is Christian in its base. That is the idea of the dignity of man, the dignity of the human person, rights of man, and fraternity, all coming to, of course, we would all agree, coming out of Christianity, but then leading into this idea that when you reverse that, when you turn that around, it's not apparent or it's not obvious that this political system that's based on these principles necessarily roots itself in Christian revelation. So working one way does not necessarily make it apparent going the other way. And so the people in this project do not necessarily see that connection. Yeah. And this is what Phimister again calls the fallacy of affirming consequence, that A leading to B does not necessarily make it obvious that B goes back to A. And even Schuman, I believe, recognized this problem by the mid-1950s. Schuman used the phrase supranational egoism, that if this project gets out of control, it could lead to a supranational egoism, so that instead of the Christian lamb flourishing, it could become a secular lion. And perhaps that's what we're seeing today. You know? So this was a real concern for Schuman, certainly later in his life. The idea that this organization, this European community, would not be a friend of the church ultimately, but would be a rival to the church. And so Phimister makes these points, which I just wanted to reiterate. Now, highlighting this, we could talk about some different incidents or events. And I would like to highlight here the year 2000, when John Paul II criticized openly the European Union's Charter of Fundamental Rights, because it had no mention of Christianity in there or the Christian roots of Europe. And yes, as you know, there was a lot of criticism of the 2004 European Constitution process, which ultimately failed, the Treaty on Constitution for Europe, which failed, because that also, the European elites also rejected a statement about the Christian roots of Europe. As a parallel in my own country, we have been going through the same process in the United States. In 2013, maybe some of you remember, President Obama was invited to give a talk at Georgetown University. Now, Georgetown is a very prestigious American university of Jesuit origin, Jesuit Catholic origin, and it was founded in a very, very, I would say, orthodox Jesuit spirit. In fact, there's a legend in America, mostly by Roman Catholics, that the fourth rector, I think he was the fourth rector of Georgetown University, Monsignor Peel, actually baptized George Washington into the Catholic faith on his deathbed. So that's possible that happened, and that has become legend. But whether that's true or not, going back to this 2013 situation, President Obama gave a talk at Georgetown University. Well, Georgetown was apparently embarrassed by the logo IHS, EHS, which is, as we know, is a logo for Jesus Christ, which was in the background. Obama should speak before this background, IHS. And there was a cross there, a crucifix, and then there was the Georgetown logo, which had some religious symbolism there. Well, all of that was covered up for the Obama talk. And this is a Catholic university, right? And by the way, I should mention, now I'm not sure about this, but I believe that it was not the Obama administration that requested this to be covered. It was Georgetown University itself, which has become very much a secular university, which elected to cover this. Now, that may have been at the suggestion of the Obama administration. I'm not sure. But let me just read you a quote by one of the representatives of Georgetown, what she said about this. It seemed most respectful to fully cover the IHS and the cross so as not to be seen out of context. Now, the reason I mention this one incident is because it seems to me it's a bit of a metaphor for what has happened with the European Union. That the European Union, which started out with such a strong Christian basis and such a Catholic Christian, has by the new millennium has become almost embarrassed by its roots and won't even put the word, even consider putting the word Christianity in any of its official documents. Now I'd like to transition to my second point in my talk, and this is the concept of federalism. Where does I'm kind of a federalism scholar. I've studied federalism. I've written widely on federalism. And federalism, many people believe that the Americans invented modern federalism. In fact, it was James Madison who was the genius of the American political system, who many people think single-handedly invented modern federalism. This division between regions or states and a higher central authority, dividing not dividing power, but sovereignty, the authority to use power. Because, there are many unitary states in the world. I live in Slovakia. Slovakia is a unitary state, and power is distributed to the regions of Slovakia. But the difference is, of course, that the central government in Slovakia and Bratislava can take that power back anytime it wants. Well, with federalism, that's not the case. Once sovereignty has been distributed to the regions or to the center, it cannot be taken back. And that's why almost always in a federal situation, you need a constitution to a contract. Well, where does our sovereignty begin and end, and where does yours begin and end? So you've got to have that constitution. Well, in the American case, the Constitution, as you know, was created in 1787, largely written by Madison. And very early on, there was a controversy in the American debate about it after the new country was it developed. And it was a controversy about, of all things, a national bank. should there be a national bank in the United States? Well, Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, yes, we should have a national bank. But others said, no, it's not in the Constitution. It's unconstitutional. There's nothing written there about a national bank. Well, the Hamiltonians prevailed. They got the national bank approved, and there was established a national bank. But the controversy continued until 1819, when there was a famous court case, the case of McCulloch versus Maryland, in which finally those on the side of the national bank, they won. They won that court case. And there was a doctrine that was created out of that court case called the doctrine of implied powers. That is, that if there is nothing in a constitution or in official documents about the creation of some new political entity, it can still be created if it can be implied from that constitution. Well, who's going to decide that? Well, of course, it's going to be the Constitutional Court that's going to decide whether or not there is an implied connection here between what we want to do and what is actually in the Constitution, which doesn't mention what we want to do specifically. And of course, what happened, as you know, in American history, this became widespread use, this doctrine of the implied powers. We see it particularly with Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s with the New Deal and things like the Social Security Act or the Farm Act. We see it in the 1960s with the Medicare Act. We see it in 1970s with the famous abortion case of Roe versus Wade, which made abortion legal in all 50 states when there's nothing in the US Constitution that gives the national government, the central government, the authority to do that. Well, what it shows is that if you can get a majority on the court, the high court, to believe that it is implied power of the, then you can do almost anything you want. And now going back to the European Union, we can see the same thing happening with going from Schuman's originally concept of a Christian democratic union to what we have today. Just one case, 2018, as you know, the European Court of Justice declared that, well, first of all, they declared that a spouse is basically gender neutral. The concept of a spouse should be gender neutral. That was the European Court of Justice that said that in 2018. And I believe in that same case, the Court of Justice also said that member states should recognize same-sex marriage across all the member states at that time. And this extends then to member states that don't recognize same-sex marriage having to recognize the right of same-sex couples for legal residency in their states. And, you know, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know because I know you're all great experts on all of this. But what I would like to say is that what, you know, again, from my American perspective, what I perceive has happened in the United States is now happening in Europe with the European Union. I see this same unraveling and the same abuse by the high courts of using sort of implied doctrine, implied powers to stretch these basic principles of Europe, which were never meant to be stretched in that way before. Well, okay, let's get to the coronavirus now. And just in my concluding thoughts, you know, with everything that the Lord sends us, we know that there is some good that can come out of it. No matter how bad it is, we know that something positive can come out of this. And I think my personal view is that with the coronavirus, it has given us this space to step back and to look at the European Union and to think about this process and how far it has gone and how far we wanted to continue to go, and how to bring it back to its roots and the ideals of Schuman, Robert Schuman. So, my fellow panelists, I just would like to say in conclusion that I think this could be a blessing. This time that we have to reflect could be a blessing to think about all of some of what I've mentioned. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, David, very much. You made a very interesting comparison, and you referred to the examples of in the United States, and you, proved proved that this kind of mechanisms are just happening in Europe. And of course, and your voice is very important, because yes, in the treaties, for instance, of course, we don't like the European Union in that, model, in that shape, right? But in treaties, there are many things you basically, referred, many things saying that, let's say, Brussels, the European Parliament, is not allowed, or Court of Justice in Luxembourg is not allowed to go to the certain issues. We have autonomy in Poland, in Slovakia, everywhere. But thank you very much, because you just showed, presented the mechanism are working, and through that mechanisms, they are going, to finally impose and create a super state, which is, like you said, if that would be a really true, a pure model of the federalism, okay, then it would be not bad, right? But this type of a mechanism just bringing to the kind of a bankruptcy, both the federalism and bring to the bankruptcy that what we initially had as a good approach in the European Union. And now, this, as I call the apostles of Artiello Spinelli, my theory, but not only theory, these guys, they have some certain goal. This is not the question of that you have a two free sides, or the round table, which are discussing about, creating some reasonable model. There are some apostles of the Artiello Spinelli. Really, they, as you know very well, the Artiello Spinelli ideology. This seems to be more dangerous than Soviet Union, communism. And, these apostles, in fact, they are just going toward to implement that. And these mechanisms, to some certain extent, they use is the strategy, is the method of implementing or just realizing their goals. And of course, a Court of Justice in Luxembourg is as well a kind of a tool. And we have many, evidences, many, examples, which show us, and you delivered some of them, which show us that, this basically doesn't work on in a form of a democracy, in a form of a certain, a consensus, agreements, discussions and talk. But just, they are different trials to use this mechanism to finally impose what they want. And therefore, we should be very aware. Of course, this is not very easy. This requires a big challenge. As you, for instance, mentioned the European Constitution. Yes, basically, if you look, referring a little bit to that example from the Georgetown, the guys who basically rejected to refer to the value, to the God, right, to the Christian values in the European constitutions, they were Christians. Yeah, they were Christians. So finally, a Christian Democratic Union, this kind of a parties, both from many countries, they stopped, to put this preamble in the European Constitution. So thank you very much that you delivered that example from the Georgetown, because we see that is the picture, the word is not so clear. This is not just 0-1, logic. There are many different, forces. There are many, actors in different, circles who are basically against the Schuman Europe. And these actors, even if they are, as you said very nicely, the Georgetown, the Jesuits, led by the Jesuits, it doesn't mean that they are really in favor. I am not judging anybody. They are not in favor of a certain value we think they should be, right? So the word is not so clear, and we should be aware where we are and how we should act not to slip down. So even Robert Schuman, in some certain very great statements said that this guy of Spinelli, they are going, to bring you to sleep down, so that you are not aware and you feel basically very secure. Probably you think, there is a peaceful climate around you, but finally this is going to the opposite direction. And as well, thank you very much for your final conclusion. David, the coronavirus. Believe me, this is exactly the same conclusion I got, that the coronavirus, gives a kind of a chance. Even this can be by the believers taken as a kind of a signal from the God. But for everybody can be, taken as a chance to get step back, to look into that, what is happening, and reconsider that. And in fact, the title of this panel, as you notice, is just reshaping the European Union into the community of European nations after the experience of pandemic, after the taking conclusion after pandemic. So, your independent, consideration about that seems to be that many people, approach or can perceive that as a potential chance as well, which is just challenging us to reshape that. And I hope, that this will be not neglected. Thanks a lot again, and of course you come back soon, to further discussion. Now let's, Pablo, step forward. So floor is yours, Pablo, please.
Yes, well, I don't know if I will speak in only one speech, but for me is for preparing this meeting, I wrote again the Schuman's declaration when he said Europe will not mate all at once or according to a single plan. And for me, it's important in order to watch the future in Europe, because I will expose my philosophy theory about Plato and the idea of simploque. In the world, A is connected, all the things, A, B, alpha and omega is connected, but not all the elements in the world are connected themselves. A is connected with B, and B is connected perhaps with C, but C is not connected with A. And I think this idea of simploque is our landscape in the post-coronavirus Europe. No? Europe can be a meeting, but is not only one thing. For example, a sample pre-coronavirus crisis is a Polish sample, the group of Visegrad, in order to defend the interests in the European community. Several nations are allowed in order to protect their interest. And I think that perhaps according to the idea of Schuman, perhaps it will be the future. Europe will be a forum, but for some initiative is not waiting for Brussels or the opinion of the people of Brussels, and for several initiatives, several countries of Europe with the same interests will be associated for a goal. In this case is the case of Visegrad. In the Spanish point of view, I think, for example, we the Spaniards can learn the lesson of Poland in the case, for example, with our Union of Portugal. The close is Spain and Portugal. There are nations after the independence of Portugal that will live separate lives. And for example, nowadays the projection of Europe in Latin America, the facilitator of that is the Spanish policy in Latin America. And also Portugal has the question of Brazil, a Portuguese-speaking country. And well, Spain is nowadays the country with more kilometers of high-speed trains, but there are not high-speed trains between Lisbon and Madrid. And perhaps in this Schuman idea, the interest of Spain is get a higher level of association with Portugal, taking the model of Schuman. Another thing that Mr. Richard talked in reference is the project of the European Constitution and the point of view of the Pope John Paul II. Well, my idea about is the risk of the license in all this question, because it's a risk. Sometimes when the people talk about politics and religion, finally the way of the 19% of the speaks is the faith and the theology. For me, religion, in the point of view of the civil thinking, is a moral, independent of the theological questions. And the license has associated the idea, the notion, talking in the Schuman thing, that the license is neutral between the different religions, and this is false. License is not neutral, and license is a serious risk, because at the moment that there are not moral religion in politics, the law becomes the moral, and at this moment is the end of the liberty. Perhaps, and for example, I want to talk about the LGTB movement about that. In Spain, we have the homosexual marriage. Well, this is a law of the parliament, but now in Spain is the risk to talk against the LGTB lobby. First of all, is the law, and no religion becomes that the law becomes moral. And for me, is the most important risk. Religion has an important role in order to provide a moral different with the spirit of the law. And this is the essence of liberty. For example, in the case of the United States, perhaps Mr. Richard will correct me, but there are a lot of reference in the political world about God. But that's true. But in the United States, there are a lot of different religions. And finally, the churches in the United States has the same consideration of civil associations. Is an empty idea of God in the point of view of theology, but the idea of God in the spirit of the laws allows us to differentiate law and moral. And for me, this is very important for the liberty. I have another points prepared of my speech, but I don't think perhaps other speakers want to speak about, and I want to reserve for me a second speech. And thank you. I'm not able to listen you.
Yes,
The professor. Oh.
thank you, Pablo. Thank you very much for this consideration. Let's take just put questions, to both, of the panelists, and some people from like Sylvia, if you want. I see Professor Gizicki as well. If you want, to ask the questions, but let me first, to David. To David, that yeah, you draw a picture. You draw presented the problems which we are facing. So, what you, in that approach, or that return to Schumann's Europe, you are aware about the different issues. The question is about the priorities. What and how we should, at the first step, to do acting to, returning to that Schumann's Europe. If you would be kind, so to point to some certain concrete issues. So trying at least to answer what and how. I would be I would appreciate if you try to get this challenge. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the question. I just first I would go back to what I usually tell my students in their first course in international relations. And I often remind the students that the academic study, that is the study at the university level of what we call today international relations or world politics, it has nothing really to do with what the United Nations is doing today. The United Nations very often is doing things or making priority of peripheral things, such as the rights of the child, UNICEF, various economic councils and organizations. But the original idea of the study of international relations and the original idea of a League of Nations or United Nations was really for one purpose and one purpose only. It was to prevent war and to promote peace after the horrific events of World War I. And this idea of a European integration, it follows this same path. As you know from the writings of David Mitrani and Ernst Haas, the original understanding of functionalism or the integration of sovereign states was not necessarily for economic prosperity alone or for social engineering, certainly not. The original idea of people, idealists like Mitrani, and certainly the founders of Europe, Schuman, Monnet, and Adenauer, was how do we prevent a third world war from occurring, because we will not survive a third world war. How do we get these countries to cooperate together? And this was a noble purpose. I think as Catholic Christians, we recognize this was a great noble purpose for the idea of integration. Well, we've gotten so far away from this idea, as we've discussed already, that what do we do now? How do we get back to it? I've mentioned that I think some of the great crises of the last few years have given us some time to think about this. Starting with the 2008 financial crisis, which is connected to the United States of America, of course. And then, of course, we had the Greek crisis, we had the refugee crisis, and now we have the coronavirus crisis. So this has given us a little bit of a pause. My view is that what is necessary is a rethinking and a restructuring of the organization. Again, the initial motivation for this integration was noble. It was noble purpose, and it has kept the peace in Europe for all these years, with the exception of Yugoslavia, of course. But it was noble purpose. So we don't want to do away with the organization. Personally, I'm pro EU in the sense of the idea of a fundamental integration and cooperation among member states is a good thing. It's a Christian thing, yeah, cooperation, and it should be advanced. But how to do it? And so I think this has given us some pause. One of the things I think we really need to think about is the Commission. You mentioned the Commission earlier in your comments, and the Commission is not elected. They are appointed, of course, by the member states. And so for many people in Europe, who are these people? Who are these commissioners? And what are they doing? And why do they wield so much power? And so a rethinking of that and the structure of the Commission would be a good place to start. Also, the Court of Justice. Again, who are these justices on the Court of Justice who are appointed for 6 years, renewable terms, and who have seemingly all of this constitutional power? And as we know, the Court of Justice of the European Union is a constitutional court because it has said we are a constitutional court, and they interpret the treaties of the European Union, which are the constitution, as we know, of the EU. And so, again, we deserve, as people living in Europe, and by the way, I'm an American citizen, but I pay taxes in Europe. And so part of my tax money is going to support this organization, obviously. How can this be reformed? How can the Court of Justice be reformed to make them more accountable? Now, let me compare this again to what's happening in the United States. Because of the overreach of the High Court in the United States, with this doctrine of implied powers, that the US government, the national government, can do almost anything it wants if the court can connect that to one of the constitutional powers, even if it's not in the Constitution. Now, we have a debate between two sides. One are the constructionists, and they believe that the High Court should interpret the Constitution exactly word for word according to the original intent of those who wrote that document. And then there's the interpretists who say, oh no, the Constitution is a living document, and we need to interpret the Constitution according to modern times, flexibly. Well, I will tell you just very directly, I'm a constructionist. I believe that words have to have meaning. The people that wrote those words, they had to have some idea what those words mean. And so we have to know what they meant and not stretch them out of all proportion. And I think the European Court of Justice needs a big review, because it seems that the European Court of Justice has gone down the path of the American Supreme Court in this out of control, progressive interpreting of core documents, foundational documents of the European Union in the case of the Court of Justice. So that would be my suggestion. I don't have any more detailed solutions other than that. I look forward to your suggestions, but I would take a strong look at the Commission and democratizing this Commission, and taking a strong look at the Court of Justice and the authority that they allow themselves, and try to bring them back to more of a constructionist philosophy of judicial review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Yeah, you pointed to a very concrete issues, and it is, area I notice to be changed, which are consistent with many voices I heard from the experts, and I'm glad you as American, you are pointing to this problems. I am, frequently invited by many ambassadors in Poland, ambassadors of European countries, and some of them exactly highlight that what you said. The people in their countries, they don't know, what the European Commission is doing, why, some certain guys have a power, why they are, this body is not democratic one, and what this body has influence on their life and how they can, impact this both European Commission and the activity of the Court of Justice in Luxembourg. And it seems to be that from the perspective of even citizens of the countries, this issue is perceived. And yes, they fully agree. As we look into the European Parliament, where basically, each member of the Parliament have just, time for 1 minute or most 5 minutes, So in this commission, European Commission, this is not only the guys on the top, not commissioners, but as well these guys as the directors. As we have, the statistic, so the statistic shows that on the position of a directors, which are basically the decision makers, right? They are, as I said, majority, they are guys from Germany and France. And if they prepare the package to the European Parliament, this package is only with the conclusions. If these guys have just 1 minute to vote, there is no chance that the European Parliament is able to change much. So basically, we have the perception of citizens of the European countries is that, yes, the European Parliament is appointed according to the population. Okay, so this seems to be democratic. But of course, even if this is appointed to the population, it doesn't mean that these democratic processes are happening. But the issue, the European Commission is the body which is the engine in that vehicle, and this engine decides where this vehicle is heading to. So, additionally, the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, just referring to your example in the power of the Court of Justice has in the United States, Supreme Court, this mechanism, finally, the cooperation with the European Commission and the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, create the power which is really difficult to stop. And this is, I'm happy you indicated, because in my opinion, these two areas are of the major issue. And this is very interesting because, frequently many problems, as you talk to the members of the parliaments and some politicians in the countries, they rather, indicate to the other problems as the more important, and frequently these issues are not perceived as a main key factor driving the direction of that entire body we call the European Union. Okay, so thank you very much. And the same question to the Pablo. Get the challenge, So what and how we should change as a first major priorities?
Well, retaking the idea that I said, always is the fight between the hegemony, the center in Europe, in Brussels, and the counterparts. I think that we must establish this fight with Brussels, but I think that the political organization is something complex. A way for counterbalance the power of the bureaucrats of Brussels, this structure of super state, is create this idea. Perhaps Spain, for the trade in America, is interested to be associated with Portugal. But for example, in other questions, can be an association with Poland. For example, a point that I led in my last exposition is, well, nowadays it's clear the non-Christian and the Christian fight inside the idea of Europe, no? More or less that the Christian Europe is the Christianity. Europe is an idea developed after the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, associated with the Protestant world. The idea of the Catholic Europe is the Christianity, led by the Christian states, but the idea of Christianity was the end in Westphalia in 1648. For me, one thing is the balance with the non-Christian world in Europe. And other question is, in my opinion, the new, in the crisis of the coronavirus show, the new fight between Catholics and Protestants inside the European Union. For example, the behavior of Holland against the Catholic tradition of the Mediterranean countries. For me, it's very important to balance the situation between Catholics and Protestants. And in the Catholic world, we have the idea of the penetration of the Protestants as watch the Protestant world as the world of the freedom. All these ideas of Max Weber that I don't like, because the Catholic world is the lack of freedom, is the fundamentalist world, and the Protestant world is the very strong economic activity, freedom, and this is absolutely false. When I was in my classes, I have this discussion with my students. Protestantism is freedom, Catholicism is not freedom, and that's not true. And I show a sample. Nowadays, between the Brexit, there are a fundamentalist state in Europe, was the United Kingdom, when the chief of a state is also the chief of the church. Nor in Spain, nor in Italy, nor in Poland, the Cardinal of Toledo, the Pope, the Cardinal of Toledo or the Cardinal of Riesno, the primacy of the church, are prime minister of that. If there are some fundamentalist state in Europe, it's a Protestant country, like Great Britain or like Sweden, when the king is the chief of the Lutheran Swedish church. I don't want to get to return to the pre-situation of the Westphal Treaty, but also I think that we, the Catholic thinking, must to balance the question with the Protestants. Is another option, and we are the same patterns of them. Perhaps we, the Catholics, we have a complex of inferiority in this point, and I think in this point, a new group of Visegrad can meet the nations with a Catholic tradition, like Poland, like Spain, like Portugal, like Italy. Nowadays, I live in France for several years, and I'm not consider France a Catholic country. But this is another discussion. But this acts, Lisbon, Madrid, Rome, Warsaw, can be another group in order to build this Europe of the Simploques, no? Of different associations with different goals in order to counterbalance a central power, an oligarchy in Brussels.
Yes, thank you, Pablo. It's, that's interesting. Point you raise in that discussion, because yes, this something. Important. How this, if we speak about the Christian values in shaping the community of European nations, then this dialogue between Catholics and the Protestants and setting a common consensus is very important. And you just indicated that there are some certain issues which have for sure some certain impact on that what is happening in that mechanisms of the European Union. So let just you both brought us to the indicated us the areas which are impacting the shape of the community of European nation potentially. So David indicated that the coronavirus, right, is just can have a reasonable impact if we utilize that. You indicated as well, the European Commission and the Court of Justice. But let's just ask the question to you both. There is some certain, factor which can potentially impact, and I think is already impacting the European Union, which is a free this area. So this is not only Visegrad, but all these countries which are in this free this area. Not only 12 countries belonging to European Union. So this Baltic country, the Romania, Bulgaria, but as well Ukraine, and other countries which are in that geographical area. We notice that this Freezes area project is developing, and Americans are very much indeed engaged in that project. And this project is just took some certain very concrete shape. But my point of view is that not point of view, but just some certain consideration. Do you think that the Freezes, community, can be some certain prototype for the community of European nations? So if we work in the right direction in the Freezes community, in the cooperation not only in the economy, in the energy sector, in the infrastructure, but as well, in that, all areas which are quite common for this countries in that region. Most of us were under the communistic regime, so we have some certain common history. From that perspective. So again, a question to you: if we consider that factor, the community of Freezes area, as a prototype of the community of European nations. So what I am thinking, it's not going about that the Freezes area is going to be separated, but if the Freezes area is going to be shaped in the right way, then it can be a kind of a factor challenging the other West European countries to come back more closer to the idea of Robert Schuman. So the question is, do you think this Freezes area can be prototype, challenging prototype of the community of European nations, challenging the return, challenging the West countries and the entire European Union to return to the Schuman's idea. So first, please, David, please.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think in the context of what happened in 2004, that we can clearly see that the 10 countries, the accession 10 countries in 2004, which were in large part Central and Eastern European countries, that they added very, very apparently the Christian dimension to the European project. That these accession countries, these 10 countries that came in to the Union in 2004, had much stronger Christian cultures in many ways. They had higher percentages of Christians who regularly practiced their faith, and the governments of those countries reflected more strongly Christian values, particularly Catholic Christian values. So, and it was kind of interesting to see what happened thereafter in 2000, because that was right about the time of that Constitution treaty that we talked about, which ultimately failed. But I think that I think that up to that time, the members of the European Union were a little bit in shock. The Western European countries, which had become so secular by that time, were a little bit in shock by the Christian sensibilities of these Ascension 10 countries, and their desire to infuse the organization with their Christian vision in many ways, including, as I mentioned, the statements in the Constitution Treaty of the Christian roots of Europe and so forth. So in a very general sense, my answer would be yes. I would say that, countries in further east, especially Ukraine, that share this very, very strong, these very strong Christian roots, would be a plus in the sense of realizing or bringing us back a little bit to Robert Schuman's vision. The only question is that because of the fact that these countries are in crisis, many of them, would they be stable enough to actually have that influence? Because as we know, these countries also have a lot of corruption, and there are many, including actual physical war, ongoing war, hot war. So to what degree would these countries actually make such a contribution is, I would say, not quite clear. But in a general sense, if we compare this to 2004 and what Poland and Slovakia and Hungary and some of the Christian Malta, some of the Christian countries that acceded into the European Union, then definitely there could be that effect. Thank you for the question.
And well, in this point, in the case of I will take the crisis of the coronavirus, as window of opportunity for that. I think that the first lesson learned about the coronavirus in Europe is the completely inutility of the Commission that fails in order to coordinate the task of the states. For example, in China there are a fight between the Italians, French, Spanish, and German secret service in order to take the shippings of masks and other medical items. The question in the post-crisis is that as the response of the members of the European Union is different, the post-crisis scenario is very different. It's not the same. The situation in Poland or in Portugal, where the government did an efficient task in order to prevent the pandemic with a low level of financial resources in the health, or the response of Spain or France was absolutely a disaster in this field. Different answers provoke a new scenario with new patterns that we don't know exactly nowadays. And in order to watch the post-communist well, first of all, is the question of Ukraine. Normally, I will talk about my humble opinion, no, but is not the same the puppets of the satellites of the Warsaw Pact as Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and other countries, former members of the Pact of Warsaw, that former Soviet Union. I think there are two different geopolitical scenario. I think that pro-Europe Ukraine, I think, is a serious risk for the security and the peace in Europe. And I think that nowadays, in this circumstance, is much better don't move the things. And also, is only a personal opinion. For Poland, I think that this is not very interesting to approach to close Ukraine to Ukraine to the Europe as seen, because Ukraine is a competitor, is a geopolitical competitor of Poland. Nowadays, in this new Europe, in the world of the defense, in the world of NATO controlled by the Americans, Poland has a strategic position as a border of the free world. The incorporation of Ukraine will be the end of this privileged position of Poland. And I compare the world of Schuman. Remember that at the end of the Second World War, the idea was share Germany, and Germany will not have never again an army. With the risk of the Soviet threat, 10 years later, Germany has a new army. I think that nowadays, in the context of NATO, Poland is something like something like Germany during the Cold War, and I think this is an advantage for Poland. Other thing is the size of Ukraine, bigger than France, and the population. I think will be an economic competitor in the future for Poland, and also taking the rolling back of Moscow in this case. I think that the Baltic republics nowadays is a serious problem because they are not able to defend by themselves and need the cooperation of other armies of Europe. I think that an approach to Ukraine, for me, is a serious risk for the safety, the security in Europe. And in my opinion, first of all, we arrange the things that we have at home, and in some decades we will see again. But I don't think an approach to Ukraine nowadays is a good idea.
Yes, you like to add more, Pablo?
I listen to you now. Perfect.
Okay, so thank you very much for your contribution. And now just a quite challenging topic for you both. Yeah, the Schuman fraction and the European Parliament. This is an idea to create such a Schuman fraction at the European Parliament.
Yes.
So if we thank you very much. We went through, you prioritize many areas which should be as a main important area to change. We need to have a tools, mechanism to return to Schuman's Europe. One thing like European Commission you mentioned. But the next one, which is important to have some power, is a kind of an influence in the European Parliament. So the Schuman fraction in the European Parliament is a challenge to create. The question is how to do that. If we consider that we have in the Frieses area of Visegrad, for instance, Viktor Orban party. Viktor Orban party is in APP, in the group which is basically in the not majority, but the big part of that APP group is basically left or neoliberal heading. But many excellent, great people in that group, APP group, are the politicians who are voting for really Christian values and the Schuman ideas. An example is Fidesz, Viktor Orban party. But as well, I see many people in Croatia, Slovakia, Romania, Portugal, Spain, Italy, some of them as well in Netherlands and Belgium, of course Poland, Baltic countries. So if we just pick up all these, politicians from these different, groups, now existing groups, so there is a potentially can be created a Schuman fraction in a size of, I am not exaggerating, but in the size which can be not far away from 200. 200, which will be the major, the biggest group, the biggest fraction in the European Parliament. The question is, why is something like that is not existing? Because there was not offer on the table. There was not offer on the table. Of course, I forget about as well, the Law and Justice, the party from Poland, which is now engaged in the group, conservative and reformist group. So, because this offer was not on the table, some of the thinkers to create a kind of a Schuman fraction were just trying to go in the following direction. For instance, for instance, the Reformists and the Conservative Party, to which belong the Law and Justice, says, "Hey guys, come to us." They say to Viktor Orban, "Come to us." So we will create a bigger group of a Conservative and the Reformist Party. They say to some politicians from Italian members of the European Parliament, from Croatia, "Come to us." It's not going to work in that way. Because, if you try to attract somebody else, then this somebody thinks, I lose my identity. I like to be a kind of a host, a kind of a creator, that new body. So in my opinion, such approach that one big group is going to attract the others, right wings parties, it's not going to work. For instance, Fidesz, Orban party in the European Parliament, they have something like, I don't remember exactly, 12 people. There is, but they will not go to the, conservative and the reformist group. They like to have kind of a autonomy. So let's let's take this consideration. If we put on the table, on the round table, to create the Schuman fraction, which will be a very new body, a new entity for everybody, for the people from Spain, from Italy. I mean, this who are basically in favor of the Robert Schuman ideas. This will be a new body as well for the Polish members of the parliament, Croatia, Slovakia. So this is a very new approach and the concept from, I think, a political point of view and psychological point of view, and as well from the community point of view. So because this this kind of a proposal creates a good feeling that we create a kind of a community. We create a common. We are engaged all in that, creating a new body. So we feel ourselves very well. So this is a kind of a consideration. So finishing my introduction. What do you think about that? What do you think about the way how to implement this, and how you assess this as a goal? I am not saying this is easy, but my question is, how do you perceive this as a very important goal to, in that process we talk about coming back or return to the more or less Europe according to the Schumann's idea. So Richard, David, go first ahead.
Thank you very much. I have to say that I am not aware of that proposal until now, but let me talk a little bit around that idea, around this idea of a Schuman bloc or a Schuman faction in the parliament, which sounds to me to be an ideal type of solution in some sense. But here's the problem, and I'm going to go back a little bit to an American Bible scholar who maybe some of you know through his books translated into Polish and other languages, Scott Hahn. And Scott Hahn once said, "We are not facing a crisis in the church. We're facing a crisis today of saints. We don't have enough saints." And I would say the problem in Europe, it's similar. We are facing not a crisis of ideas of how to structure the parliament so much. We're facing a crisis of Christians in Europe, Christians. Because if we had enough Christians, we could realize many of these structural changes. And what I mean by that is, well, let me give you an example. I live in Slovakia. Pope John Paul II visited Slovakia a total of 3 times. And I often asked myself, why is the Pope, John Paul II, spending so much time in this little country of 5.5 million people, instead of going to countries more often like France or Germany? He's staying here in Poland, Slovakia, Hungary. And of course, the answer came to me that if there's going to be a new evangelization of Europe, it's not going to come from Western Europe. You can forget it. It's going to come from the East. And that's why I believe John Paul spent so much time in the Eastern countries, visiting even little countries like Slovakia, to prepare the people for this reality, that they will be the hope of Europe, that they will go to the West and re-evangelize Europe. Okay, very good in theory. The problem is that in terms of voting in the European Parliament, as you probably know, the countries of Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, some of the numbers of voting have been terrible. I think Slovakia maybe holds the record for the lowest voter turnout for the European Parliament, which was a few years ago 13%. of Slovaks voted in the European parliamentary election. Now, how are we going to realize John Paul II's vision of getting more Christians into parliament, into the European Parliament, if the people don't vote? Well, a couple of years ago, I was asked by a couple of NGOs in Slovakia if I could, as an American Catholic Christian, if I could give a little bit of my advice about how to mobilize Slovak Catholic Christians in the Slovak parliamentary election. And I gave a talk, which is posted somewhere on YouTube, of a number of things that can be done to mobilize Christians in voting. And one of those things was that I mentioned was a voter guide, a Christian voter guide to give to all people so that they can see the Christians who are running for election and they can see the position of those Christians and they have then knowledge to vote and get. So, okay, that's a long answer to your question. But what I would say, if we're going to realize such a structural change in the European Parliament, such as a Schuman faction or a Schuman caucus, that's a great idea. But we've got to begin with more Christians entering the parliament. And one of the ways to do that is mobilize, especially Eastern European Christian people to vote and to reform the face, to change the face of this parliament. And then I believe these other suggestions will fall into place. Thank you very much.
In order to explain my thinking about this question, I will reduce to the soccer, to the football, the problem that you explained. I think the question is like a football team. You are talking, Mr. Krzysiak, about the quality of the forwards or how can play the forwards. But in my humble opinion, this question, our team is more complicated. A final good result for a team is choosing a very good goalkeeper, defenders, has midfielders with a good quality of techniques, and the work of all the players can be, if we have a Lewandowski as a striker, to win a match. And I think that talking about the forwards is watch the final process of the question. One thing is like nowadays we are talking a Sunday about ideology, and other different thing is everyday make policy. And I think the huge enemy in Europe, especially, for example, countries like France or Spain that I know well, is the new Marxism or the thinking, because all the ideas of the economics by Karl Marx, death a lot of years ago. The question nowadays is the super structuralist Marxist led by Antonio Gramsci. Is what is all this cultural Marxist, and the battlefield is before the parliament, is in our schools, in our families, in our universities. By this reason, all the neo-Marxist theories is against the family, because the family, for me, is, I'm teaching the university, but for me the family is the best school, university, or professional school of the life. Is the place where when the individual is formed. At the moment that you attack and you destroy the family, that, for example, a conventional marriage is the same that other kinds of marriage, you are attacking directly against the family. And I think that the family is the first and the most important piece of the political organization. The law prevents the marriage as a legal institution. And I think that the fight is then. And perhaps it's possible to create a Schuman lobby in the parliament, but has another important problem that in other fields like economy or development equipments, perhaps is Poland and Spain, in this case, we have some people of Poland and Spain, we have the same feeling in order to preserve the idea of Christianity. But perhaps it is not our same interest to share the European Fund for Development. And this is the problem. By this reason, I think that first of all is the social fight, against this neo-Marxist, this Gramsci thinking in all the fields, in the family, in the media, in the university, in the civil association. And if our team is good, if we have good goalkeeper, good defenders, good midfields, the ball will come to Lewandowski, and surely with this quality, we will score a goal. But Lewandowski is not only the solution for me.
Mr. Professor, I can't hear you.
No?
Thank
Yes?
you.
Mr.
So,
Prusiak.
Pablo, thank you very much that you, by the way, promoted our very good, football player, Lewandowski. He's really excellent. So we are slowly approaching to an end, but, I just put the notes from your very concrete indication what to change and how, more or less. And I put, at 12 items. 12 items. So it seems to be you were very fruitful. So the first item was, the change, the European Commission. We discuss more or less what the problem, how to do that. The next is, a relationship between develop or improve relationship between the Catholics and Protestants in that, towards cooperation in returning to Schuman's Europe. The next piece, which is, a kind of a goal function, which was a base for the Schuman. The next is a court of justice in the Luxembourg. The next is a Frisis area as a kind of a factor which can play a very important role. The sixth point is a Schuman fraction. The 7 is saints in suits. So as Schuman was called a saint in suit, but as well not the men, but as well women, saint in suits. We need that, and as well you referred to this because, the John Paul II said that nowadays we need more saints in suits than saints in different as a priests, right?
Mm-hmm.
The number 8, this is a mobilization of Christians to the voting. The 9 is, we need to have more candidates for European, for the position of the European members as a members to the European Parliament. Number 10 is a teamwork, which is, this what, according to me, there's a deficit in teamwork between within the group of Catholics, but as well in generally in Christian. So the Christians stay back, are not so active, as we've seen as well the European Constitution. So they stay back and they basically, stop this to develop. Number 11, the ideology of Gramsci, but generally speaking, the ideology of Altiero Spinelli,
yes,
which we allow to spread out and promote. And the number 12 is education. So I would say we, as a challenge to this, we need to start to establish a popular university of Christian social teaching under the name of John Pope second, and Robert Schuman. We should start to create these popular universities of the social Christian teaching, which will be not based just on the universities only, but basically going into the society, into the different groups of people which are in different age. This example we have in Poland. In Poland was established such a one university, which is not based on the law of these universities, but the students attend 3 years. They pass the finals as well. They have the education of different issues related to the social teaching. And they are in different ages. I am as well a professor for some subject in that university. This is a kind of popular, as we call. And the people are coming from different professions. They are, belong to the regional governments. They are doctors, teachers, they are students, they are engineers, they are as well politicians. They are people, being working in the different areas of the administration. So basically all of them. So this 12 points I put, as a conclusion, kind of a conclusion and a fruitful discussion of your both Pablo and David. And I will, put in the written, I will send you. And I would suggest, if you don't mind, that we will basically extend this suggestions, try to support them in more, to support them, just put some more pages in written, not much, but, to explain what was reasoning behind that, what we discussed. So for the very end, I ask you for the kind of a final conclusions. If you would like to add something, or you would like to wrap up and summarize your today speeches, so go ahead, and I am not limiting now your speech. Just be free to take time so much as you want. Go ahead, David.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So I would go back first to some of the structural changes that I mentioned, and as I would especially focus on the Court of Justice, and to possibly introduce a promise for these justices in the Court of Justice that they will interpret the treaties of the European Union, that they will interpret these treaties according to the word and not according to any progressive or liberal ideas they have. Going back to the American example, as you know, we had a big debate in the United States a few years ago during President Obama about Obamacare, so-called health care. And the idea was that we should have in America a national health care system. Well, what's wrong with that? European countries, most of them have a national healthcare system, okay? And personally, I have nothing against that. Really, in principle, I have nothing against a national healthcare system for the whole United States. The problem with the Obamacare was that the US Constitution, in our federal system, it does not give Washington the authority to make a national healthcare system. But instead of changing the Constitution, which is the way to do it legally, you change the Constitution. Instead, they went around the back door and they got 5 of the 9 members of the High Court to agree with this Obamacare. And so that's the problem. And I see the same problem in the European Union with the Court of Justice, that they have taken many of their progressive and secular ideas, and they have stretched the wording of the treaties far beyond what was ever intended by those who wrote those treaties. So that was one thing. And finally, I will just end once again. I think the crisis in Europe is not only a crisis of structure of the organization, it's a crisis of Christians. It's a crisis of Christianity. And if there is going to be hope for Europe, I agree with John Paul II, it's going to come from Eastern Europe with a new evangelization of the West. But that will only happen if Christians in Eastern Europe go and vote. And if they fill the parliament and other institutions with Christians, so that a Schuman caucus can develop, from that. I would also just finally mention the bishops. Where are the Catholic bishops in all of this? Now, we know there's a Catholic Bishops' Conference to the European Union. It's been there since 1980, but it's not enough. We need to get the Catholic bishops of every country in the European Union more involved, more educated about this organization, and more involved in promoting a Schuman vision of this organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And I say I fully agree with your final statements. So it seems to be we have much, challenges. Pablo, go ahead with final.
Yes, I'm substantially agree with this final speech of Mr. Reichardt. And you put the question of the reform of the European institutions is very complicated. Nowadays, with 28 partners with different interests in every country, yes, we are agreed that the Commission is an oligarchy. That's true. But how we can agree a reform of the Commission can provoke a political battle in Europe? It's very complicated. I think that the most important is, first of all, limit the power of the Commission and the European institutions and cooperate between the different nations of the European Union in different, punctually and in different fields. Because Mr. Reichardt comes from the United States, I want to finish with a book that I like a lot, is the Alexis Tocqueville, The Democracy in America. And one of the for me, more spectacular ideas of Tocqueville is when he talks about a society that it is very uniform. Tocqueville said a society that is very uniform is a society without liberty. And this is the question. I don't think that the strategy is to get an uniformation of the European Union. The strategy in the future is create a plural, a multi-goal strategy of cooperation of different countries in order to get that everyone wants in the Christianity, the liberty. Because, for example, I forget one sample. We talk about the Court of Justice for Human Rights. And the cause of justice of human rights, for example, in Spain, is perceived like the Hall of St. Peter, something like that. After the country, we go to the heaven, forget the solution. And for me, for example, the Court of Justice for the Human Rights is the most corrupt and less professional tribunal in Europe. For example, in Spain, for confidences of the judges in the Spanish TV, when a Spaniard subject is in the tribunal, normally is elected a Lithuanian, a Romanian, and a Greek. And what is the procedure of that? Well, what is the Spanish judge of this tribunal? Let's go to ask them, to ask him. Well, for that, I think in the future, the most important is stop a little bit the European steamer, limitate the steamer, and provoke and develop other networks of power. For me, is the way for get the idea of freedom of Tocqueville.
Thank you very much, Pablo, and thank you very much. We are approached to the an end, and we had today a very great speakers, David Reichert from United States and Pablo de la Fuente from Spain.
And Poland.
Excuse me?
And Poland.
I
am moje polsko nie dobrze, ale ja lubię Polska.
Are you living in Poland?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we thank you for all the viewers, for all participants who attended, on different media. And we got, kind of a summary conclusions in that panel. And we are going to share these conclusions. And of course, David and Pablo, you are invited to continue our cooperation and to write down some not long, written, material, but as well we are considering, and we not considering, we are going, Institute of Schuman Thought is going to continue this debate on the future of Europe. We had yesterday the discussion in the area of the fiscal area and the economy. We get as well a week ago a discussion with politicians, and we are going to continue that, meetings about the future of Europe. Potentially, these meetings are going to be, every 1 or 2 months. And we are going to bring on that debate more speakers in different areas. And this debate is going to be kind of a parallel debate, which, the European, which was triggered in the European Parliament in January. And as David said, we like to engage, this many people from the Christian areas, right wings politicians, and as well everybody who is in favor of a Schuman Europe. And we would like, to basically take part not only in that discussion, but as well to contribute in actions to have a more real impact, influence on these changes. So I am just, inviting all of you, and as well announcing that this process of this debate, with a goal to implement these conclusions and recommendations, we are going to continue. And we will, of course, come back to you, presenting a certain timetable and the certain topics we are going to hesitate. What we are going to do over that big, roof, we are going to discuss, let's say, around 5-6 major areas. So that to be focused not only generally on, in whole, but just, to decompose this discussion about the future of Europe, the European Union, decomposing on a 5 or 6 different areas. And, some areas which I am very, thank you very much for David and Pablo, and some areas, very important areas, according to me, or strategic areas you indicated in our meeting. So thank you very much again, and thank you, and see you, and be in touch and be in cooperation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for contribution.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.